So, welcome again. Teaching with AI, designing AI-aware learning experiences. That's today's topic, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, Lori, for putting the comment in the chat. Um, just want to remind everyone that this is the fourth in a series of 6 webinars that we're doing on the first Wednesday of each month. We started back in March, and so I'll throw in the chat the link where you can catch up on some of the past presentations. And the next one we have is on Wednesday, July 1st. And that's the faculty role in AI-driven academy, staying human in a machine age. So that's the next one coming up, and I hope you join us for that. All right. So with that, I'm going to just hand it right over to Jean because I think most people are repeat customers here and
Yep.
they've heard the spiel before. So again, thanks for your time, Jean, and thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah, as Jeff said, thanks for joining us today. I know it's summer and people are having a chance to stop and take a breath and relax a little bit. So we really appreciate you taking a little time out of your day to talk AI with us. And today we're going to talk about probably one of the most challenging aspects of AI in teaching and learning right now. What do we do about student assignments? Whenever I talk to faculty, the first thing they say is like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. My students are using AI and they're bypassing learning, and I'm worried about they're not learning anything, and I can't assess their learning. And all of the issues with AI often stem with how we're using AI in our classroom. And when we look back at the research on this, those concerns are absolutely justified. We have about 18 months of research that really told us we have data behind it that when students are using AI, they're really not thinking as much and they don't remember what they wrote about and they're not retaining it the way they used to be. And they're really just not engaging in that critical struggle, that cognitive dialogue that we want them to engage in to truly learn the content of our course. And a lot of this research has been coming out and it made all the faculty say like, oh my gosh, well, if that's the case, we need to restrict AI. And we're going to try to design AI resistant assignments so that students can't use AI because we want them to be struggling. We want them to think. We want them to engage. We want them to really go through the challenges that are associated with the process of learning. And all of that made sense based on what the research was telling us when we could see what happens to critical thinking, retention, and learning when students are using AI. But emerging research is really starting to challenge this. And it's pushing us to think a little deeper. Because most of that early research that said, students are cognitively offloading and they're just not doing the work, they're letting AI think for them and they're not learning, it actually maybe had more to do with the design of the task than the AI itself. Because what the newer research is telling us is we have to look a little more deeply into this. When we tell students you can use AI, but we don't tell them how to use AI, we don't tell them what we want them to do with the extra time that's freed up once they've used AI, they will cognitively offload. They're efficient. If we don't tell them the purpose of it and what they need to accomplish, and we simply say you can use AI as a tool, they tended to offload the struggle to AI and learning did go down. But when you start to change what we tell students to do with AI, new research says we can actually increase the learning. Because the key issue was not the use of AI. The key issue is what did students do with that freed up cognitive capacity? And when we do not tell students what we want them to do with that freed up cognitive capacity, they do nothing with it. And thus, learning is lower, retention is lower. They cognitively offloaded it and then did nothing with the extra time that was available. But in that case, it wasn't necessarily the AI, it was the design of the learning task itself. New research that just came out, and this is from Wang and Zhang, it was published in 2026. I can send you a link to the article if you'd like. But they talk about the cognitive offloading paradox. And what they found was when you told students you can use AI for brainstorming, for helping you write, for whatever, but that was it. And they didn't really tell them what else to do. AI absolutely replaced their thinking. But when they told students, we want you to use AI as a partner, and we want you to give AI some of these lower end tasks because I don't want you to invest any of your cognitive energy in these tasks, students actually then reinvested the cognitive energy where the faculty asked them to. Because now the faculty would say, don't waste your time on figuring out the details of APA style. Let AI do that for you. Don't even worry about how you're going to communicate it. Let AI do that for you. What I want you to do is I want you to think. I want you to dive in and really analyze what this means. Do you agree? Do you disagree? How would you approach this? Are there contexts where this doesn't matter? They ask students explicitly to reinvest that saved energy into some other aspect of the learning experience. And when they did that, they actually found student learning increased, critical thinking increased, and retention increased. The issue wasn't AI, it was how are we using AI? In essence, what was the instructional design around the task that incorporated AI? That was the deciding factor in whether AI was helpful or harmful. And so, really, they kind of boiled this down and they said it's a U shaped relationship. And we can really think about learning in kind of three zones. The first zone, and this is the one that most of us wanted to move to when we said no AI, ban AI. This is when there is no cognitive offloading at all. We ask students to do the task 100% themselves. We want them to do whatever background research. We want them to organize it. We want them to communicate it. We want them to do the cognitive struggle. And when we put them in zone one and we ask them to not offload any of the tasks, learning does occur, but it tends to be slow. It takes a lot of effort, but they do achieve learning. Honestly, this is what I call pre-AI learning. It's what we always had to do. That's when you have to do all that struggling on your own. And then there's zone two. And this is where most of the early AI research was looking at, without really realizing they were looking at what's now called zone two. This is when they would say, you can use AI, but they didn't necessarily tell them what to do when the cognitive energy was freed. What do I do with this extra time? And what they found in zone two was learning declined, critical thinking declined, retention declined. Students became faster. They offloaded whatever they could offload to AI. But what was really happening was as they offloaded what they could to AI, whatever cognitive energy they had available was now being split between the task they were doing and learning that basic AI literacy and how to use AI. So the learning of the cognitive task itself was actually very low. And so it makes sense that a lot of that early research that was coming out said, when we tell students they can use AI, they just cognitively offload it. They did. And the energy that they had was going into learning how to use AI, which was still a relatively new technology for them. So learning absolutely decreased in this zone two. But the interesting findings by Wang and Zhang looked at what happens when we give students guidance on how to truly partner with AI and to completely offload some of the tasks to AI while explicitly telling them where to reinvest that cognitive energy. And when we did that, what we found was students' critical thinking actually went up. They learned the content on a deeper level and they retained the information because they weren't scattered, kind of using a task, kind of not. They were very explicitly told, these are the parts of the task that I don't want you investing cognitive energy in. Give those tasks to AI. It can do it for you. Here's where I want you to spend your energy thinking about how I want you to engage with the AI, how I want you to engage with the output, what I want you to do with that. And when students did that, the learning actually was higher than it was in zone one. The key factor was not the AI. It was how we tell students to interact with it. So this U-shape shows us, were they learning with no AI? Absolutely. But learning decreased when we simply said, be efficient, use AI. Because now they weren't doing anything with that extra energy. They were doing the original task, but they were just doing it faster and without thinking about it. So they were cognitive offloading and they were learning nothing. But when we then said, and here's where I want you to invest, and here's what I want you to do, and here's how I want you to think, learning actually increased above that original zone one level. So when we talk about now designing assignments in the AI era, it's not just about AI. It's not, should I let my students use AI? Should I ban AI? The question really has to become, what is it that I want students to do? What cognitive work is actually important for this particular task. Because so often, historically, our assignments have kind of jumbled that. We might say we care about critical thinking and we care about students being able to really dive in and think about what it means, but then we have assignments and rubrics that require them to analyze background information, consolidate information, communicate that effectively. And so, even though we said we cared about critical thinking, we had all of these other tasks that impacted whether or not they even had the cognitive energy left to think about the things that we cared about. So, today, what I want to talk about is not AI resistant assignments, it's AI aware assignments. It's recognizing that our students are learning in an environment where AI is available. And if we don't tell them how we want them to use AI, first of all, chances are they're going to fall into zone two and they're going to use it scattered without intention and they're just going to try to do things faster. And then learning is going to drop off, or they're going to hide the use from it. And again, they're not really getting the benefits available from it. So when we talk about the AI aware, we know that it's out there. We know that it can impact teaching and learning. How do we design our assignments so that we're truly measuring the cognitive work and that learning that we actually care about? So I could almost even argue this isn't a presentation about AI at all. This is a presentation about really thinking about what we care about and how do we measure that and how do we find that in an era where AI as a tool exists. But we have to start with the learning. Because if we don't start with the learning and we simply start by making rules about AI, what they can and they can't do with AI, what's going to happen is by default, we're probably pushing students into a zone two, where they're going to have scattered AI use, whether we can detect it or not, they're probably going to be using it and their learning is going to decrease. But if we can start by really clearly identifying, this is my goal. This is what I'm trying to accomplish with this assignment. Here's the cognitive work that I need students to do. And then how does AI layer into that? Where is it going to help and where is it going to hurt? Once we can clearly identify these three steps, then we can start to communicate it with students. Because the reality of our students today is they are ruthlessly efficient. They are busy, they are tired, they are juggling a ton of priorities. They are going to try to do the things that we ask them to do in the most efficient way possible. But they're also there to learn. They do care. They do want to gain things. But if they don't understand what they're trying to gain, they're going to default back to efficiency. If they don't understand why we're asking them to engage in the cognitive tasks we're asking them to engage in, they're not going to do it. So we can't simply make rules about AI and expect students are going to follow. We have to make rules about AI, explain why we're having those rules, and explain what that means for the learning experience and what we need students to accomplish. And when we can start to put all of that together, then we can design AI-aware experiences that truly become meaningful for our students. But step one, focus on the learning. So right now, I want you just to think about one of the assignments in your course that maybe you've been struggling with. And by struggling with, chances are you've been worried that students are simply using AI to bypass the learning process, that they're no longer learning the way that they used to be learning. AI is now interfering with that, and you just don't know what to do about it. Let's start there. I want you to think about that assignment. What are the essential pieces of learning? What is it that that assignment is truly trying to measure for your students? It might be that you want them to reason. You want them to think about it. You want them to go back and forth on possibilities, live in that shade of gray and be able to ask the right questions and be able to see multiple perspectives. It might be that you want them to be able to go out and find evidence and read through that evidence and be able to critique it and know where it's strong, know where it's weak, know which pieces of evidence are most important for whatever task you're trying to do. It might be that you want them to be able to apply your course concepts to new situations, that they can think about the different things you've discussed, they can be able to pick out which are most important, and they can utilize them in a new, meaningful context. Maybe you just want them to be able to critically think about it, to provide some judgment. Lots of us teach in disciplines where it's not always about correct answers. There are possibilities, all of which have varying degrees of correctness and various consequences for whatever those judgments and decisions might be. And so maybe you really want them to think about good decision making and what that looks like, recognizing their disciplinary context. The first thing you have to be able to do before you ever think about AI is clearly articulate, what am I trying to accomplish with this assignment? What do I want students to be able to do? Because once you've identified that, then you can start thinking about, where will AI help me get there? And where is AI going to interfere? And when it can help me get there, how do I have to direct the student's experience so that when they use AI and offload some of those tasks, they can reallocate that cognitive energy to meet the learning objective? Because the key isn't AI, it's how you design the task. And so the AI role continuum, and that's what we're going to spend our time talking about today, just helps you think about, where does AI layer into these decisions that I'm making when I create these assignments? But equally important, it's only one piece of this. Because if you put the assignment on the continuum without telling students what you want them to do with that reinvestment of cognitive energy, chances are you're not going to reach your goal. So the AI continuum is really kind of step one. It says, okay, here's where I'm thinking AI will help or hurt. Here's what I'm actually needing students to do. And then here's how I'm going to tell them to use AI in a meaningful way to free up cognitive energy that allows them to actually meet this learning objective. And so as we go through the continuum, that's what I want you to think about. In any class you teach, or in every class you teach, any given assignment might fall in a different place on the continuum because it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. For me personally, I have assignments that range across the entire continuum depending on the course level, and even within a given course, I have a lot of variability. But I've gone through every assignment and thought about, what am I trying to accomplish? Where does AI help? Where does AI hurt? And what do I need students to do with that energy? So with that said, let's dive right on in. Level one, and this is the one that I think a lot of us kind of reverted to simply because we were trying to ban AI out of fear that it was interfering. Banning AI is fine if it explicitly helps you meet your learning objective. So when would I want my students to not use AI at all? When they need to have a functional memory-based understanding of content, when they need to be fluent in that information, when it's about their own lives and about reflections, or maybe when they're demonstrating a skill. I often tell my students, one of the things, I'm a psychologist, one of the things about being a psychologist is to be able to talk the language of the discipline. So that means on some level, you do have to have some of the terms and theories memorized. You have to know what they mean so you can use them conversationally. Even though you have your phone available, if you're talking to a professional in the field, you can't sit and look up every word. You can't sit and go Google like, oh, I know I learned about this once. What was it called? You have to be able to talk about it. And so I tell my students, for these tasks, oftentimes these are quizzes, these are in-class exams, these are written assignments that we might do in class. I say it's because you need to have a conversational understanding. You need to be able to recall it without bringing anything else up. This is part of what it means to really be knowledgeable in our field. Or I need you to be able to think through the pros and cons, because in a moment that you're interacting with somebody, you're not going to be able to look it up and have the time to run out and do it. Notice every single thing I list is prohibited. It's prohibited because using AI isn't going to be authentic for how they have to actually engage with that in the real world. So think about, in your classes, what things do they need? I teach everything from general psychology all the way up to advanced doctoral statistics. When I'm teaching general psychology, the only thing I'm doing that's in that prohibited range is personal reflection. This is a general education course. I am not expecting that most of these people are going to advance as psychologists, and if they do, we'll kind of memorize those terms and theories later. But my goal for a general education course in psychology is that they can apply it to their own life and they can think about what that means. So that means when I tell them this is prohibited, it's because I want them to think about their life, and they don't need AI for that. And I'll then tell my students, in this assignment, it is about you reflecting. It's about you applying it to your own life. I don't want you to use AI. And equally important, I'm not going to grade you on your writing. because grading you on your writing is now going to motivate AI use to make sure the writing is good and the writing is perfect so they get the good grade. If what I care about is application, I now need to try to isolate that application. Now, if I also cared about writing, which I do in other courses, just not my general psychology course, then we might actually bring AI in as a secondary part of this assignment where they have to, step one, AI prohibited, write your reflections in bullet points. What does this mean to you and how do you apply this to your life? Step two, use AI to communicate this effectively. And now you have to go in. Did the AI accurately communicate it? Did it cite appropriately? Did it do all these things? Because now we're actually learning writing as well. But in general psychology, I'm not. So in general psychology, I let them give it bullet points and I make sure the grade focuses on the learning I care about. And I tell them AI not allowed. And I make sure the task doesn't unintentionally encourage AI use by doing things like grading their written ability. So you go back to, again, what's the goal? Now, every time I say this, I'll have a couple people in here that say, yeah, but I need my students to write effectively. That's one of our learning objectives. If it is, then you can justify why you would have them writing and not using AI as a learning objective. But in my general psychology class, that's not one of our objectives. So I need to separate out what is the learning I'm actually trying to accomplish. So what do we do in that class? And a lot of my classes, we do have quizzes that are no AI. We have tests that are no AI because I tell them, I need you to memorize some of these terms and theories so that you can talk about them conversationally. I have journal assignments that they have to write in class that's no AI involved. If this is an online class and I don't have that in-class opportunity, I might have assignments where I actually say, I want it prohibited and you have to handwrite it. Now, do I know that they could, in theory, go and write it with AI and then copy? Yes, but now you go back to your grading criteria and you make sure you're actually grading on the thing you care about, which is the level of reflection, the level of application, rather than the written communication. But level one, anytime you want to say, do not use AI, make sure you can explain why. Because once students know that they need to be able to do this conversationally, they are much more willing to engage in that task to be able to do it conversationally. But if they think that this is just a hoop, they have to jump, and you're removing the tools to help them get there, they're going to be very resistant. The other thing that I often do, especially when I'm talking to students about, level one's prohibited, you need to have a conversational understanding. I actually teach them, here's how you can use AI to help you get there. Use AI as a learning tool, and then I will give them have it quiz you. Here's how you can give it prompts that it will quiz you so that you develop that memory-based understanding. I didn't want you to use AI just to answer the question. Use it to teach you what we actually need, which is how do we remember this? Because now students stop seeing oh, I was cheating with AI. Now they start saying, well, if I used AI there, I'm literally not getting the skills I needed to get from taking this course. But I could use AI to help me get that skill. But now the assessment of my skill is going to be AI prohibited because using AI in that context interferes with what I need. Level two, then, and this is the risky level, this is where we say minimal support. And this is where the vast majority of that early work with AI and even faculty who were very pro AI were dabbling. And here's where we would say, you can use AI as a tool. You can use it to help you brainstorm. You can use it to proofread. But we didn't really tell students what we wanted them to do with that extra cognitive energy. And this is where a lot of the early research said we got ourselves in trouble because now students were taking that limited cognitive energy and they were using it to try to figure out, where do I use AI? Where do I not use AI? How do I use AI? And really, AI was almost becoming more of a barrier than anything else. That doesn't mean you're not going to have level two tasks, but it needs to mean you're very specific with students in level two tasks. So if you have a task where you could say, it is fine that you use AI for brainstorming, but I want you to then make the decisions. You need to give students really clear guidance as to why AI would be helpful here. I can give you an example from my own class. I teach an introductory research methods class. It's a 200 level class. Most students at that point have only had 2, maybe 3 psychology classes by the time they get to that research methods class. And one of the first assignments I ask them to do, and this comes in week 2 of the course, is I say, Think about a topic you want to research because we're going to spend our entire semester designing a research project and a proposal around that topic. Well, the problem is my learning objectives are really about the research design. Can they identify variables? Can they identify a design? Do they understand how the design impacts output? That's my learning objectives. The problem is I ask them to give me a topic they want to research, and most of the students are like, I don't know. I don't know enough about psychology. I haven't had enough psychology questions to even know. So what I do is I say, you can use AI to help you figure out a topic that you actually care about. Because the more you care about this topic, the more invested you're going to be in thinking about the confounding variables and in thinking about the nuances of research design and how our design can impact what we find. I want you to have a topic that means something to you. Well, the vast majority of 19-year-olds in their sophomore year of college have no idea what topic is meaningful for them. And so that task alone becomes cognitively overwhelming. So now I've brought in AI and I tell students, I want you to start with this prompt. And here's a prompt that literally says, my major is fill in the blank. Here are some of the topics that I have found interesting in previous classes I have taken, and they fill in the blanks. I'm currently in a research methods class and I need to pick a topic. Help ask me questions so that I can figure out what topic I might be most interested in. And so the prompt that I give them turns it around and AI now starts asking them questions. And so it go through and it will ask them, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Why did you find these topics interesting? AI asks some different questions each time, but the prompt I give them, they fill in some info and then AI asks them questions. And I tell students, here's your assignment. This is in a level 2 assignment. Use AI, put this prompt in, answer the questions that it gives you. It is then going to brainstorm topics for you. I want you to take your energy, all that mental capacity now. Think about each of those topics. Which one do you like the most and why? That's it. I just want you to analyze the options that have been given to you. They didn't have the disciplinary knowledge to give themselves a good list of options. But now that they've gone through this process, they've got some options, and I've told them, use your energy. Their assignment then was always pick a research topic. Now we've used AI. I told them AI can help them brainstorm. I want you to pick a topic and explain to me why you picked that topic. What made it interesting? Why that topic from all the topics you could have? I got to my learning objective. Students then could offload all that background noise when they didn't really have enough knowledge to even make that decision because AI can help narrow it down for them. Level 2 works if you can tell them really specifically how you want them to use the AI and why the AI will genuinely help them get to that learning objective. In this case, students don't have enough disciplinary knowledge. So AI can help them filter through their interests, point them towards disciplinary topics that might be relevant to them. And then the students' cognitive energy can go into thinking about, of those options, which am I most interested in that I could actually stay focused on for an entire semester? So there's nothing inherently wrong with level 2. We just have to make sure we're putting enough parameters around level 2 that students don't just offload the task. Because had I simply said, you can use AI to pick your topic, most students would go to AI and they would say, I need a research topic for my research methods class. And that's where they would go. And then it would say, okay, and it would brainstorm things. And then they would pick, not having enough knowledge of AI, not having enough knowledge of the discipline, not having enough knowledge at all to have truly made that a meaningful experience. By putting some parameters, telling them how you use it, and you being really clear about what you want them to accomplish with it, now you can make sure that a level 2 task wasn't cognitive offloading, but using AI to actually help you get to the learning objectives. Which then moves us into level 3, and this is more scaffolded support. So again, like you're just shimmying up the line a little bit. Now you're giving really built-in directions for here's how you should use it. So it might be that you tell your students, you have lots of information. Let's go back to my research methods class. Again, the point of this class is about research design. But to design a good study, you have to know what's already been done in the field. Well, I really don't want my students wasting lots and lots and lots of time reading through these articles because my objectives learn how to use the database. I want them to be able to find articles. I want them to be able to evaluate and know that it's a peer-reviewed article. Then I want them to be able to take articles and understand that a synthesis is where are their gaps. All of that is my learning objective. Now, to get there, historically, we've walked them through the library database. Then they have to read all those articles. That alone could be a week or two of work. But for my purposes, that wasn't the most important part. I don't want to spend a week or two reading journal articles. What I really wanted to do was have them understand that they had to have the gaps. So now that assignment has been shifted. And I've said, we're still going to work on a library database, but we're also going to talk about how you often find research articles outside of library databases. So we're going to spend more of our energy on what's a peer-reviewed article. And so I even tell them, if you want to use AI to help you find these articles, go ahead. Because what immediately happens, it starts to hallucinate. And I'm like, well, did you go back? I need you to produce the article. And they'll say, well, I can't find the article. And then we get to talk about the fact that AI is not the best place to start for peer-reviewed articles. And then we can go back to the database. Or at that point, we can talk about AI tools that are designed for research. So now we're starting to build in just a little bit of information literacy on AI. But I then will tell them, once you have your articles, go ahead and use AI and get a summary of each of those articles. Then, before you ask AI to do anything else, just read the summaries. I don't need you to read the full article. We're not going to spend 2 weeks doing this. Read the AI-based summaries for our purposes. And I want you to think about, after you read the AI summaries, what themes did they agree on? What was different? What questions do you have that none of them answered? That becomes their first assignment. Then I tell them, now that you saw the themes, take those summaries and take your notes. You had to think first, upload it to AI, and summarize the gap. That's going to help us get to that research study. So here the scaffolded support was very clearly telling them, I want you to offload the cognitive task of reading every one of those articles. It's not cheating. I want you to do that because reading those articles for this particular learning objective is not important. Time consuming, but didn't get us to where we needed to be. Offload that because I want you to come back and I want us to think about the gap and the research question that we're going to address. So in scaffolded support, you are intentionally offloading small, dedicated pieces and then telling students where you want them to put that energy. You're also here starting to build in little tidbits of AI literacy where you're telling students about how to verify, how to utilize, and how to truly interact as a partner. Because one of the key findings from Wang and Zhang's study that just came out was if students just view it as an add-on tool, they are more likely to cognitively offload and just give that work away and not learn. If they view AI as a partner in which they need to ask the right questions, analyze the output, and go back and forth with it, they were much more likely to invest that energy in meaningful aspects of the collaboration. So we're going to really drill into students every time we give you a task. Here's what I need you to do with that extra energy as you're using AI and a partner in this process. The key here, though, tell them what to do with the time they save. Because if I would have simply stopped with, you can use AI to summarize your articles, that's where they would stop and there's no learning that occurred. But if you tell them, use AI to summarize your articles, I don't want you investing your time there. After you've read the summaries, I want you to invest your time thinking about it. Where did they agree? Where did they disagree? What wasn't there that you were looking for? That's what I want you to do. You've given them really clear guidance on that reinvestment of cognitive energy. So it's not about, did you use the tool? Did you not? Did the tool get you toward the learning objective? And so keep asking yourself again and again and again as you think about where your assignments lie on the continuum. Does the assignment itself ask the student to invest their cognitive energy on the objectives I care about? And can AI offload some of the other pieces that were not important, but were necessary to get us to the thing we cared about? If so, those are the things that you want to have students use AI for. Tell them exactly where you want them to offload that information and where you want them to reinvest that energy. And this starts to move us up the continuum then to level 4. And this is partnered creation. As students start to dabble in this, you're now going to tell them it's not about just using it as a side tool. It's about engaging with it. And so here are going to be your assignments where you literally say, I want you to dive in and I want you to push back. When it gave, so let's even pretend now we're in a more advanced course, not in my research methods course, because I don't have the knowledge to push back on journal articles yet. But now in my capstone course, I will literally say, use AI and summarize the article. Now read the article. Do you agree with the AI output? Annotate the AI output. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Where did AI kind of like oversell it? What did AI not mention that you found was important yourself? Articulate what you would change, why you would change it. As an example, one of the assignments in practically all of my upper division courses used to be write a literature review about fill in the blank, whatever topic it was in that course. And we would do this because I wanted them to have some like in-depth knowledge about some of the topics that we were covering. So I wanted them to pick a topic they were interested in, write a literature review, understand what the research said about it. That task, writing a literature review, students were very easily offloading to AI and they were learning absolutely nothing. When I changed that task and I made this a level 4 task, and I literally said, I want you to start by using AI to write a literature review. Go to AI, give it the prompt, have it write the literature review. What I want you to do is annotate that literature review. I want you to go in and verify every single source that it gave you. How many were hallucinated? How many were real? What did you notice about the difference between hallucinated and real? Now I want you to go to the library and I want you to do a search for the key terms. What articles came up in the library that it didn't even touch in the AI? Why didn't it touch those? Were they important? Were they not important? I now have them using AI as part of that critical thinking process. Because in the end, my objective was for them to understand that concept, understand the research around that concept. They didn't need to write the literature review to do that. They needed to engage with the content. And so having AI write it and them now critiquing it, revising it, explaining it, diving into it, giving judgments about it, that meets the learning objective. And it's much harder for students to bypass that and offload all that energy just to the AI. It's right here where we start to worry a little bit less about the cognitive offloading paradox. Because the minute you bring AI in as a partner, as a designed portion, you're now automatically moving more into that zone 3. And because now you're telling students really how you want them to do it and what you're wanting them to accomplish. And so when you're asking yourself, does this meet the zone 3 requirements? There's really kind of one clear question you can ask yourself. If a student submitted what AI produced without any additions, modifications, anything else, would they fail? And if they would, you're good. Your assignment is doing exactly what your assignment should do because students needed to engage with the AI output in order to be successful on that assignment. But if AI could just do it and you received it and you're like, oh, that would pass, it's not an AI problem, it's an assignment design problem. And that's where you need to dive in a little bit deeper and ask yourself, what do I need to change to make sure my students are putting their cognitive energy on the learning objective? And then that starts to shimmy us in then to level 5. And this really is kind of what I say is a much more intentional version of level 4. Level 5, AI literacy itself becomes part of the learning objective. Now, in level 4, I might have asked them to critique and evaluate, but we weren't intentionally talking about the AI. And in level 5, we do. So now it's not only evaluate if it was accurate, talk to me about why it wasn't. Were there biases? What was in the algorithm? What does the training data look like? How does that impact our discipline? And I think that's a key part of level 5. You need to think about the impact of AI from a disciplinary perspective. I teach in psychology. We talk a lot about bias and out-group and in-group and who's represented and who isn't. And so now not only are we going to talk about the learning objectives of our course, but we're going to talk about AI's impact on the learning objectives of our course. I can give you a concrete example of this. Just the other day, we were talking about institutional bias and how oftentimes these biases are so built in that we don't even think about them. And it's just so natural. And so my assignment for my students was to go to AI, upload a picture of themselves, and tell AI, give me a family. And that was it. Give me a new picture of a family. And then Analyze what it gave you. What does that tell us about institutional bias? And what happened, and I could predict this, this is why we did this assignment, is AI made every single one of them a heterosexual couple with two children, boy and a girl, of the same race that the person that uploaded the picture of. And I started saying, what does this mean? Notice there's no mixed couples. Notice there's no same-sex couples. Notice there was no children families. Notice there was no family with 10 children. Notice that not one person was put in with a wheelchair or a visible handicap. What does this tell us about how AI is going to give us information in our discipline? What do those biases and those algorithms mean when we now ask it to do things that are much more important than create a picture? But we know that that has biases. We know that the training data influences what we see. So you take your course learning objectives and layer it into AI as an object of that study. And so now you're using AI as part of the learning experience to help them really understand what you're studying in your course. And then level 6, this really is when they start to think about, what does AI look like in my professional world? How will I be using it? And so now you might be asking students to pick the right tool to do a task. You might be asking them to think about, what would that prompt look like to be able to complete this task? How would you know if it was accurate? And what would this mean for you? As an example of this, my son just graduated with a degree in engineering, and he said the vast majority of his assignments his last 2 years of school were absolutely level 6. It would literally say, here, you need to create the following, go write the code for it. And he goes, they weren't actually expecting us to write the code, but they were expecting that we could pick the AI tool that could create the code, that we could write a good prompt that would get us the code. We know enough about the code to evaluate that output and make sure it was functional code. And if it wasn't functional code, we could push back on the AI and tell it what we needed to revise until we got it to that. And so it's really when you start thinking, how does this look in my professional world and how will I be interacting with this moving forward? Most, if not all, of my level 6 assignments are coming in my 300 and 400 level courses or my graduate courses. Generally speaking, you're probably not going to have AI as environment if you're teaching on lower level courses. Notice as you think about this entire continuum, it wasn't, do I let them use AI? Do I not let them use AI? The question is, what do I need students to do? What am I trying to accomplish with this assignment? Because once you can answer that question, then the question becomes, how does the influence of AI change anything? Where do I need to hold back? Because if they overused AI, it would interfere with us getting there. And where do I need to change the assignment to really embrace it? Because banning AI would not be authentic and would not get me there. What I've discovered personally as I've gone through this continuum for all my assignments is a whole lot of my assignments were really assessing writing when writing wasn't a key part of the assignment. And when I would turn that over and recognize that AI can write beautifully and it can write everything beautifully, knowing that, so that's that AI aware component, how would I change this assignment? Because I was never assessing writing. What was the thinking I was interested in assessing? And once you could start to identify the thinking you were interested in assessing, now you can start to revise the assignments and think about, well, what does that look like? Where would I just openly tell them how to use AI and what to do with their energy? And where do I say, I know you could use AI for this, but I don't want you to, and here's why, because here's the ultimate goal. And then how do I design an assignment to try to stay focused on what that goal would actually be? The challenge here is that this takes some work. And so you're going to want to start with one assignment and literally dive in. The most time consuming part of this is really deciding, what is it I was trying to accomplish with this? What do I really want students to know or do with this assignment? Because oftentimes we have a history of other stuff that has started to influence that assignment. And sometimes the easiest place to see that other stuff is to look at the rubric. I had a lot of assignments where I said, I'm really interested in critical thinking and application. For me personally, those two tend to be the two top ones. And then I would look at the rubric and I was grading them on formatting, writing, communication. I would have 3 or 4 rubric dimensions that really were not targeting anything I cared about. And yet I included them because I would have a history of like, oh, the student didn't write well enough. I couldn't tell if they had applied. Well, now I started thinking, well, what would it mean? How would I know that they had applied when I can recognize that AI will write it beautifully. And if I leave all those dimensions related to writing and formatting and whatever, I am literally motivating the students to use AI to bypass the learning so that they get a good grade. So it's not just a matter of what am I asking them to do, but it's also, is my grading aligned with what I'm asking them to do? Because if we tell our students we really just care about the application and critical thinking, and then we grade them on all these other dimensions, students are going to put their time into where we're grading them. And that often is what's motivating the AI use. They know they need a good grade. They often do need a good grade for scholarships, for jobs, for internship opportunities. Grades are important. So we need to make sure we're grading them on the things we actually care about. So once you've identified that assignment, think about what you want them to do, and then walk through the continuum. Where would this lie? How do I adjust it? And most importantly, how do I tell students where I want them to spend their cognitive energy? When we think of cognitive energy as a bank, they only have so much available. When we ask them to do a task, they have to spend part of that figuring out the task. When we ask them to do a task with a tool like AI, they're going to spend part of it using that AI tool. And whatever's left, they can actually spend on learning. Now, if we don't give them guidance and just say you can use AI, they're just going to speed up that AI part and they're still not going to learn. But if we tell them, here's how I want you to spend the AI part, and here's the time that's going to be freed, and here's where I want you to spend that time, that's where the learning can occur. You know your discipline, you know your assignments. So you really kind of have to trust your judgment here about thinking about what really matters. So, with that said, we have a few minutes available for questions. I didn't see anything pop up in the chat. So, if questions popped up, if there's things you want to comment on, go ahead and throw that in the chat now, and we have a few minutes that we can address those.
Thanks very much, Gene. Yeah, I was actually thinking, like, as you were speaking towards the end, is there like forums or groups or something like that where faculty can, share their assignment ideas about designing assignments? And then you just answered it. You said, you're the expert. You should know what some of those outcomes are. And maybe it's
Well,
even asking AI with some good prompts as to like,
you just beat me to it, Jeff. The best
yeah,
place for me personally now has been I just go and ask AI, and it's literally about telling it as specifically as possible your challenge. I will go to AI and I will say, here's my learning objective, here's the course level. I actually have a big prompt I just fill in with this. And I frequently tell AI, ask me questions. And then I'll say, I really need students to do this. My old assignment did this, but it was bringing in these variables. Help me brainstorm different ways I can do that. Tell me where I can bring AI in. Tell me where I should ban AI. And I use AI as my brainstorming partner because, again, I have the disciplinary expertise to read it and be like, that's a terrible idea. That's a good idea. But sometimes I need AI to help me think of those ideas because I'm so entrenched in what I've done for 20 years. So even thinking outside the box, and AI is great to think outside the box. And go to your department. Other people teaching that class with you, the more you bounce that back and forth and have those conversations, absolutely.
absolutely, indeed. And like Veronica said there in the chat, she said, I'm sure that students have those forums as well to perhaps,
Yeah.
do their side of things too. So that's wonderful.
Yes.
Very good. Well, again, thank you very much for your time, Gene, and to everybody for attending today. This and all of our other videos are available on demand on the Lab Digital Webinars page, which I just linked in the chat. So I will send a follow-up to this with the handout and the recording link so you can share it with your colleagues. But in the meantime, have a great Wednesday afternoon, everybody. And yeah, we'll see you next month on July 1st. Thank you very
Have a
much.
great June. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye bye.